So today I'm going to be reviewing Dostoevsky's White Nights and Other Stories. Let's go. Hello, I'm Popchyk and welcome to my channel. On this channel I love to talk about books and films and 80s and 90s pop culture and all that good stuff. And if you find that you get something out of this video and you like the kind of books and films that I like, please consider subscribing, and obviously if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. Anyway, let's crack on with the video. So if you didn't know, Fyodor, I could never pronounce that right, Fyodor. So if you didn't know, Fyodor Dostoevsky, it's very difficult to pronounce it, was born and raised in Moscow in Russia in 1821, and he grew up loving books, especially fairy tales and legends and gothic and romantic fiction. And he was once quoted as saying that his imagination was brought alive by the nightly readings by his parents. And he was sent to a boarding school where he was often described as a pale, introverted dreamer and an overly excitable romantic. But his mum and dad said he was more hot-headed, stubborn and cheeky. Some of his childhood experiences naturally found their way into his writing. One in particular was when a young girl in his area was assaulted, and he said that this experience absolutely haunted him. And ultimately this theme can be seen in a lot of his work, like the novel Crime and Punishment. After a stint in the army, Dostoevsky decided to dedicate his life to writing, and after the publication of his first novel, Poor Folk, he virtually became famous overnight and he gained critical praise for his talent. And he was only 24 at the time. Wow, can you imagine that? Within the next 5 years he went on to publish 10 novels and short stories, but his subsequent works didn't receive the success that he was hoping for, mostly down to unrealistic expectations from critics and the public. Anyway, he was eventually arrested and imprisoned in St. Petersburg because he was a member of what was considered a radical intellectual circle that reviewed political books banned by the government. So he was basically in a book club. Can you imagine that? Being arrested just for being in a book club? It's just mental. And what's worse, he was tried for treason and sentenced to death. And it was when he was standing in front of the firing squad, absolutely terrified, seconds away from death, when the guards finally announced this was one cruel joke and this was nothing more than a mock execution. And his sentence was to be reduced to 4 years hard labour in a Siberian prison. As you can imagine, his experiences and time in prison changed him, and he developed terrible bouts of epilepsy that would plague him for the rest of his life. So now we know a little bit about the author, let's get into this fine book, White Nights and Other Stories. So there's 10 short stories in this collection, and I'll give you a brief rundown of each one. And it begins with an honest thief. And this is a story within a story, you could say, where a lonely man with a spare room decides to take on a lodger. After a coat goes missing, there's a lot of speculation of who took it, and so a conversation begins, where one character recounts a story of when he once met an honest thief, if there is such a thing. Next up is an unpleasant predicament, or translated as nasty story. And this tells the story of a general in the civil service, and he one day gets carried away having a few drinks with some work colleagues. And he's this kind of clean, non-drinker type of guy. And he believes in being kind to others, and it's not long before he's 3 sheets to the wind and absolutely shit-faced. And after leaving the initial gathering, he stumbles upon a wedding celebration, and he decides to put his philosophy into action. And so he presents himself at the party. And being totally out of his element, the general causes a scandalous uproar amongst the other guests. Next is Another Man's Wife, and this is a comedy about a love triangle and a man who loses his mind over extreme jealousy. Next is The Peasant Marie, A prisoner is lying on the bunk of his cell and he recalls a memory from childhood where someone from the forest shouted, "Wolf! Wolf! Wolf! Wolf!" And he ran away and he eventually crosses paths with the peasant Marie. And Marie comforts the boy and she reassures him there is no wolf. Then next up we got the crocodile. And this is about a man who teases a crocodile and suddenly he's swallowed up whole, but miraculously he's unharmed. And with the animal's owner refusing to cut open the crocodile, the man contemplates starting a social movement right from the belly of the beast. Like a lot of Dostoevsky's work, it involves a lot of political and social themes. Next up we have Popchyk. And this follows a writer who one day goes to a cemetery where he encounters some ghosts. And they all represent different emotions, cultural aspects in society and Russian cliches. Then we have The Dream of a Ridiculous Man. A man is suicidal, but a chance encounter with a young girl begins an inner journey of reflection and reinstalls his love for his fellow man. Then we have the main story, White Nights. Love this. And this story follows a lonely man who lives alone and wanders the city at night. And it's an adventure that lasts 4 nights. And there's also a movie version that's loosely based on it, and it's called Two Lovers, and it stars Joaquin Phoenix and Gwyneth Paltrow. And I talk about that in another video, so I'll link it at the end of the video so you can check it out. Is absolutely brilliant. Then we have A Christmas Tree and a Wedding, and this story is bittersweet and it's narrated by a guest attending a New Year's ball, and it's here where he sees the party's guest of honour take a special interest in one of the children. And lastly we have A Faint Heart, and this is about a young man who's just got engaged and he's facing inner turmoil and seeking true happiness. So all in all, I think this is a wonderful collection of short stories. And I think it's especially good if you're new to Dostoevsky's work and you have an interest in Russian literature. So as I love the variety of each story with themes of black comedy, political satire, love, philosophy, psychological conflict, all within a setting of 19th century Russia, which is so completely different to everything that I read, I give White Nights 4 skulls out of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that brings me to the end of the video. Thank you so much for joining me. If you take away anything positive from this video, then please consider subscribing and giving the video a thumbs up. And I hope it might have inspired you to check out Dostoevsky in some way. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video where we go into the unknown. Take care guys. See ya.